We have Dr. William Van Lear, a current villager, Professor Emeritus at Belmont Abbey College from the Economics Department. He is going to talk about the payroll tax. Dr. Van Lear, are you ready?
Yes, yes.
All right.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, and special thanks to Heather and Ann that helped set up this presentation. And it's going to be good to be a part of the group here. So what I've done is to create about a 12-minute conversation with you, a 3-part look at the payroll tax, and we're going to have about 8 slides for review as I go through those 3 sections of the talk. The first point has to do with an introduction or to give you some basics that everybody should know. The second part will cover the effects of the payroll tax on people's wages, and then finally a reform proposal. So we just did slide 1. Heather's got slide 2 up here. Let me go ahead and define the payroll tax for you and then provide its purpose. The payroll tax is basically an employment tax. So the government taxes employers, people who run companies and firms, who pay out wages and salaries. Those wages and salaries are taxed. And the main purpose, this would be slide 2, main purpose here is to fund our social insurance programs. So for this presentation, the social insurance programs cover Social Security and Medicare. There'll be a small additional tax rate added to that by states to fund unemployment insurance. The basic tax rate, though, for the social insurance programs is 15.30%. That's the total tax rate paid. More on that in a minute. Heather, slide 3. A comment here on the government's cash flow for a moment. That's the money going in, money going out. The money coming in from the payroll tax makes up about 36% of the government's revenue. It makes up about 48% of the government spending if we include Medicaid in with that figure. And Medicaid, for most people, that would be considered part of our social insurance system. So over a third of the money of the federal government's budget is payroll tax revenue. And then if you add in Medicaid to Medicare and Social Security, it's 48%, almost half of the federal government's expenditures. That was slide 3. Let me talk briefly for a moment about tax structure. No slide with that per se, but for the most part, in terms of how the tax is structured, it is to fund Social Security. That's the major beneficiary of the payroll tax revenues. There's an employer-employee split here. Employers legally pay 50% of those contributions. The employee pays the other 50%, again, for a total tax rate of 15.30. That funds Social Security and Medicare. Now, it is a flat tax up to an income cap of $138,000. That income cap rises slowly over time, but that 15.30% is a flat rate, meaning it's proportional to income. Everybody pays the same rate up to 138,000 cap. More on that in a moment. Slide 4. Let me mention about the income floor that the programs provide. Social Security and Medicare are basically like an annuity. They're there for people regardless of who they work for, how much money they made, or how old they are. So they provide a really good guaranteed income floor for people. And the programs have been a major reducer of senior poverty rates. If you go back to the middle part of the 20th century, the poverty rates of seniors around 45, 50%. These programs have helped to bring them down to 9%. Heather, slides 5 and 6. I want to make a comment here about the surpluses created in Social Security. Since mid-1980s, the Greenspan reforms of that decade created surpluses in Social Security. Social Security used to be pay-as-you-go, so the government would try to bring in just enough money to make the payouts. From the mid-80s on, the program was made to create surpluses every year. So that program never adds to the government's debt or deficit. Now, to make sure you understand something technical here, the surpluses in Social Security are allowed to be spent by the Treasury on non-Social Security beneficiaries. However, all that money that is spent is credited to the Social Security Trust Fund, and the Treasury is obligated to make good on all those credits to the Social Security Trust Fund. So again, it doesn't add to the deficit or the debt, and the program itself runs surpluses. All right, that takes us through 6 of the 8 slides. Let's go to part 2. There's no slide there per se. Part 2 covers the wage effects coming from the payroll tax. Here's what economists think. In addition to wages, salaries, and benefits, the employer has this payroll tax. So that raises the tax on labor, right? It makes labor cost more. And we would say in our economic jargon, that reduces the demand for labor. But what we can see, there's no employment effects, no negative employment effects from the payroll tax. But we do think that gradually over a period of time, employers push that tax to employees. And they do that basically not by cutting wages, but by not granting wage hikes that they might have done if they didn't have the payroll tax. So we think there's a little tax shift going on from employers to employees, even though legally it's divided 50-50. Okay, so that's part 2. Let's go to the part 3 and the reform. That's slide 7. One before that, Heather. Okay, part 3 is on payroll tax reform. I mentioned a moment ago that there's an income cap of $138,000. That figure rises slowly over time. Right now, that's the current income cap. The total tax rate on all money up to $138,000 is 15.30%. Any money one earns above $138,000 is not taxed. So let's take somebody earning $140,000 a year. Those last $2,000 earned, there's no payroll tax deducted from that person's wages or salary. As you go up the income ladder, you get higher and higher and higher up into the upper middle class, upper income groups. None of that money is touched. None of that money is taxed. Therefore, it doesn't belong to Social Security, and there's no revenue coming from those high wages. That's where the tax becomes regressive. It's flat up to $138,000. Everybody pays the same rate. Above $138,000, it becomes regressive. So if a person earns more than $138,000, their average tax rate begins to fall. Millionaires pay lower tax rates than somebody earning $150,000 a year, or somebody earning $100,000 a year. Tax rates fall, basic average tax rates fall above $138,000 income cap. Now, I mention that because in the last 4 decades, if you've been following the news and you're a reader of political economy, you know that our society has become much, much more unequal in terms of income and wealth. We're back at robber baron era kind of inequality. And the Social Security system has inadvertently contributed to that because of this income cap. Most of the income growth in the last 4 decades is in the upper brackets. Not all, but most of the income growth is in the upper brackets, above the income cap. So the Social Security tax doesn't apply to that income, and therefore there's no income coming in from where most of the economic growth has been. So a possible reform would be to get rid of the income cap, terminate the cap, make the tax completely flat on all wages and salaries. If we did that, you would bring in so much money that we could reduce the tax rate of 15.30 to only 8% on everybody. And that would give the middle and lower classes a tax cut and make the tax fair, non-regressive, proportional tax. And that takes us to slide 8 and questions. So I'm available now or after the meeting. Thank you.